Have you ever seen an old family car and wondered where they all went? One looked like a baby Valiant, another brought American attitude to quiet suburban streets, and one forgotten Aussie oddball was so strange it almost feels invented. These are 15 forgotten old Aussie family cars you never see anymore, ending with the sedan history still can't explain. Most people know that General Motors Holden assembled more than just Holdens during the 1960s, but almost nobody remembers the VX490. Built from CKD packs and positioned as a sports family sedan, it was one of the most characterful things General Motors Holden ever put together locally. Radical for something wearing a Vauxhall badge in 1962. Motor Heritage credits it as GMH's first sports sedan assembled in this country, making it more historically significant than its near-total obscurity suggests. Twin-carb engine, front disc brakes, and a genuinely eager personality that most family sedans of the period never attempted. Almost nobody knows it existed today, which makes it one of the most satisfying discoveries on this list. Genuine credentials, real personality, and absolutely zero cultural footprint left behind. The VX490 deserved a much bigger legacy. The Hillman Hunter sounds completely made up until you start digging, and then you find it was quietly assembled by Chrysler Australia at the former Roots Port Melbourne factory from 1967, sold through Chrysler dealers and driven by a surprisingly large number of families who simply wanted something sensible at a fair price. It looked like a scaled-down Valiant, honestly. Not a bad resemblance to carry in late 1960s Australia, and had neatness and proportion that aged better than most of its contemporaries. Never glamorous, never exciting, never remotely destined for motorsport glory, but it was honest, competent, and genuinely useful. Exactly the qualities that automotive history forgets first and most completely. Chrysler Australia's quietly assembled, quietly forgotten secret, now almost entirely absent from Australian roads and Australian memory alike. Coming up, a pre-Falcon Ford that most viewers haven't thought about in 30 years, and an old-school British sedan so obscure it'll genuinely make you question everything you thought you knew about what Australians were driving in the early 60s. Before the XK Falcon arrived in 1960 and rewrote the entire Australian motoring conversation, Ford was selling family cars that most people have completely forgotten existed. The Zephyr was assembled at Ford's Geelong plant, offering a proper six-cylinder engine and a handsome British body before the Falcon changed everything overnight. It is a fascinating window into a version of Australian motoring that the Falcon's arrival essentially erased from popular memory in one decisive stroke. Smooth lines, genuine presence for its era, and an interior that felt refined by mid-1950s family car standards. Once the Falcon landed, the Zephyr's entire place in the story vanished almost instantly, making finding a good one today feel like genuine automotive archaeology, a proper Ford family car that the brand's own greatest success story buried without ceremony. The standard Vanguard 6 is the kind of car that even dedicated Australian automotive historians occasionally have to look up, and that obscurity is wildly disproportionate to how interesting it actually is. Assembled through Australian motor industries, it offered old-world British character that contrasted sharply with everything Holden and Ford were aggressively pushing. It felt classy in a quiet, understated way that louder local alternatives weren't aiming for, attracting buyers who wanted something different without venturing into exotic territory. Before the Triumph 2000 arrived to claim that same upper-middle-class space, the Vanguard 6 held the fort with considerable dignity and very little fuss. Today, it exists almost entirely outside mainstream automotive memory, a refined, gentlemanly car that history quietly escorted out the back door without fanfare. Two deeply obscure British sedans already, and we haven't even hit the truly strange stuff yet. Stick around. There's an American-designed sedan assembled in Australia in quantities so small it makes the Vanguard look like a Commodore, and it's coming up sooner than you think. The Triumph 2000 was the car that made Melbourne's AMI assembly operation feel genuinely prestigious. If you were a professional Australian who wanted something saying "I have taste" without quite saying "I have Jaguar money," this was on your shortlist. 6 cylinders, independent suspension all around, and interior refinement that embarrassed most Australian-built cars of the period. It was never designed or built from scratch here, but it was a real part of Australian motoring culture for over a decade. The choice of doctors, solicitors, and people who found the Holden Premier just a little too obvious. Today, the Triumph 2000 has almost completely vanished from Australian roads and memory, which is a genuine injustice to such a composed and quietly excellent car. It deserved a far longer chapter in this country's story. If you are enjoying watching this episode, subscribe if you want. Here is a number that genuinely stops people. Australian motor industries assembled exactly 1,825 Rambler Hornets locally, making it one of the rarest locally assembled family sedans in the country's entire automotive history. All 6-cylinder, 4-door models, all built in Port Melbourne, and almost all have since vanished completely without a trace. The Hornet was a big, comfortable American-style family sedan, offering something genuinely different from the Holden Ford Valiant Axis dominating the early 1970s market, with AMI's local assembly giving it legitimate Australian credentials despite its thoroughly Detroit soul. Finding one today is a serious achievement, and knowing that only 1,825 were ever built makes every surviving example feel like an improbable miracle on 4 wheels. The Rambler Hornet richly rewards anyone curious enough to go looking. But the next AMI product on this list had even more American presence and even fewer survivors, and it's followed by a Chrysler-assembled Japanese sedan that most people had absolutely no idea Chrysler Australia was even selling. If the Hornet was Australian motor industry's compact offering, the Matador was their full-sized statement, a big, broad-shouldered American sedan assembled in Port Melbourne that looked like it had driven straight out of a 1970s detective show and somehow ended up parked in a suburban driveway next to someone's Hills hoist. It was genuinely large by local standards, offering interior space that few Australian assembled cars of the period could match, giving buyers something the big three weren't providing, that authentic American full-size experience without the full import price tag attached. Never going to trouble the Kingswood or Falcon in sales figures, but it attracted loyal buyers who wanted something completely apart from the local crowd. Today, finding a Matador sedan in decent condition makes a fully grown adult car enthusiast genuinely emotional. Long before the Mitsubishi Sigma became a familiar sight in Australian driveways, Chrysler Australia was already selling compact Japanese family sedans under their own banner, and the Galant is the one that time forgot most completely. Assembled before Mitsubishi formally took over, it was a neat, practical little sedan, far more modest than anything the Valiant lineup was producing. It sits in a peculiar historical gap, too Japanese for the traditional Chrysler Australia narrative, too Australian assembled to be dismissed as a straight import, and that awkward position is probably why history has been so thorough in forgetting it. The Galant was a decent, honest family car that deserved a more dignified exit from the public consciousness, a quiet victim of shifting badge politics and changing corporate allegiances that caught everybody off guard. A forgotten Chrysler-badged Japanese sedan is one thing, but coming up we've got a front-wheel drive British family car built right here in Australia that almost nobody remembers, and a 4-cylinder Torana that history buried completely under its own far more famous siblings. Around 35,000 Morris 1500 sedans were built in Australia between 1969 and 1972, which sounds healthy until you realize almost none appear to have survived, and almost nobody under 60 can tell you anything meaningful about them. Front-wheel drive, Australian-built, and offering ride comfort that rear-wheel drive rivals of similar size genuinely struggled to match. The 1500 was quietly advanced for an Australian-assembled family car, a genuinely modern package dressed in a completely unassuming body that gave buyers nothing whatsoever to get excited about from the outside. The automotive equivalent of the reliable colleague who does excellent work every single day, never causes drama, and is completely forgotten the week after they retire. Practical, competent, decently made, and now essentially invisible. 35,000 built, almost nothing remaining. Everyone remembers the Torana, the Bathurst victories, one of the genuinely great Australian automotive stories. What almost nobody discusses is the Sunbird, the quiet four-cylinder civilian of the same Torana-based family, sold as a sedan and three-door hatchback for people who simply needed affordable, reliable transportation without racing stripes. It was never glamorous, never fast, and never destined for motorsport immortality, which is presumably exactly why history left it completely out of the Torana conversation and pretended it never happened. But it was a genuine, honest, Australian-built family car that served its owners faithfully for years and deserves acknowledgement before the entire Torana story gets told exclusively in lap times and Bathurst podiums. The forgotten civilian of a very famous and very loud family. Still ahead, a Leyland sedan with a famously troubled reputation, a French-bodied Chrysler that almost nobody connects to Chrysler Australia, and a genuinely weird front-wheel drive six-cylinder that Leyland built when they probably should have been doing something else entirely. The Leyland Marina has a reputation that precedes it like a thundercloud, and honestly some of it is deserved. It arrived with reliability concerns, engineering compromises, and the deeply unfortunate timing of entering a market with excellent locally built alternatives at almost every price point. People who owned one will describe the experience with remarkable enthusiasm and very colorful language. There is still something interesting about the Marina's Australian story, the local re-engineering work done to adapt it for this market, and the sheer audacity of Leyland's attempt to carve out a meaningful family car slice. It was a flawed, frequently maddening machine that tried harder than it gets credit for. History remembers it purely as a punchline, which is only partially fair to a car that at least had the courage to show up. This Chrysler is one of the most fascinating cars on this entire list, and the fact that barely anyone outside serious Chrysler Australia, built on a French body, assembled by Chrysler Australia, available with the legendary Australian Hemi six-cylinder, and only 19,770 produced it was rare by any reasonable measure. The combination of a European body, an Australian drivetrain, and Chrysler's local engineering gave the Centura a character unlike anything else on the market. It was genuinely stylish, different, and quietly ambitious in ways most buyers missed entirely. It attempted something bold just as the market was about to get extremely difficult for everyone involved, and the collapsing Chrysler Australia situation robbed it of the time it needed. A short-lived, stylish experiment that absolutely deserved a longer run. Leyland Australia's decision to build a large front-wheel drive six-cylinder family sedan in the early 1970s was either visionary or catastrophically misguided, depending entirely on which end of the ownership experience you focus on. The Austin Kimberley was undeniably advanced, a spacious family car with front-wheel drive and a six-cylinder when most Australian families were happily driving conventional rear-wheel drive machinery. The execution came with complications, as Leyland Australia products of this era strongly tended to do, but the ambition behind the Kimberley was absolutely real, and the underlying concept legitimately interesting. It tried to offer something meaningfully different from the Holden Ford Valiant mainstream, when the market was theoretically ready for new ideas, even if not quite ready for this particular one. Weird, brave, advanced, and comprehensively forgotten. Classic Leyland Australia. A front-wheel drive 6-cylinder from Leyland at number 3, and it still isn't the most ambitious forgotten family car on this list. Number 1 was meant to save an entire factory, fought the biggest names in the country head-on, and still somehow managed to disappear almost without a trace. The Morris Nomad holds a genuinely interesting place in Australian automotive history as one of the earliest locally produced hatchbacks, arriving before the concept had convinced buyers a tailgate was worth taking seriously. Australian produced from 1969, it made a forward-thinking case for a body style the mainstream simply wasn't ready to embrace. It was right about where family cars were heading. Smaller, more space-efficient, easier to load. But being right early is rarely enough in a market with deeply established habits and powerful domestic alternatives sitting right alongside it. The Nomad was a genuinely clever car that arrived before its audience was prepared. One of the more quietly frustrating fates an honest family car can suffer. History moved in its direction eventually, just not in time to save it. The Leyland P76 is the great Australian automotive tragedy, and no list of forgotten family cars could end anywhere else. Leyland Australia bet everything on a purpose-designed full-size sedan to challenge the Falcon, Kingswood and Valiant directly, and produced 18,007 between 1973 and 1975 before the whole extraordinary enterprise collapsed. It was genuinely competitive, winning Wheels Car of the Year in 1973, boasting a boot large enough to swallow a 44-gallon drum hole, and offering a lightweight alloy V8 option, representing legitimately impressive Australian engineering. The timing was catastrophic, the corporate situation impossible, and Australia was left with a sedan that fought bravely, died young, and produced one of the most passionate owner communities of any car this country has ever made. Not just forgotten, genuinely legendary. And here we are. Did your family ever own one of these, or was there another forgotten car sitting in your driveway growing up? Type it in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe if you want. Thank you for watching and goodbye.